All right, welcome to the Project Management Nation, the place where we talk about all things project management and where I encourage my viewers to think beyond the certification to progress their careers. So today we're going to talk about something that is really popular. I've seen lots of videos out there on this already, so I know that it's popular, and it's all about how to win in an interview situation when you're going for a project management job. So why would I make a video when there's already a lot of them out there? Because as I've looked at those videos, I have kind of a burning question, and I wonder if any of those people have actually hired a project manager before. In my career that spans 25 years or so, I have hired literally dozens of people. So dozens of people turns into hundreds and hundreds of interviews that I've conducted, whether it's sitting across the table from someone, being on the other end of a telephone, now being on the other end of a Zoom, talking with people and learning about their experience. And in that time, I have learned what questions work, what questions don't. And I'm going to help navigate you through some of the trickier ones. I'm going to share some personal experiences. I'm going to share some sad things that I've seen happen, some funny things that I've seen happen. I've also been on the other side of the table where I've been interviewing. I'm going to share some of those experiences as well. Since there's a lot to talk about, this is going to be the first video in a series of videos about getting the interview. And in this video, we are going to focus on getting past the HR screen, which is almost always the first step in an interview process. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about all these good things here on the Project Management Nation. All right, let's get down to it. Let's talk about the tips and tricks that you need to be successful to get past that initial HR recruiter phone screen. That's the first step of an interview process. And you need to realize that an interview is a process. It's not like the movies. It's not one and done. You're not going to go in there and dazzle someone so much that they're going to hire you on the spot. I've never seen that happen in my career. I've been doing this for 25 years. What you have to do is you have to think about it as how do I get past interview number 1 to get to number 2, and then 2 to 3, and depending on how many people you're talking with, your goal is always going to be get to that next interview. And then that last interview, the goal is get to the job. You want to be able to close the deal at that point, and you're going to be with the hiring manager when you're there. So how do we get past this very first hurdle, getting past the HR recruiter? I've got 3 power tips for preparing for that interview. Tip number 1 is you need to be consistent in the way you answer your questions. And to be consistent, it means you need to prepare and be thoughtful about the key questions you're pretty sure you're going to be asked. Did you know that as a part of a process, good companies will get together after they've interviewed a candidate, and everyone who interviewed that candidate will share the experience that they had. And if you tell one person one thing and another person another thing, it's going to come out in that interview. And that's going to raise questions amongst all the interviewers about the answers that they heard. Because if you've said 2 different things in response to the same question, that raises flags, and that's the last thing that you want to have happen. So make sure that you think about the key questions that you're likely to be asked and come up with consistent answers before the interview. And later in this video, we're going to talk about what some of those key questions are in an HR recruiting screen so that you can do that preparation. Tip number 2 is prepare a set of talking points ahead of time. Just as the political candidates, before they go into a debate, they prepare their talking points, and all of their answers, they pepper in their talking points. You're going to do something similar in an interview. Make sure you don't dodge questions the way candidates do. Don't take over the interview, but make sure that as you're answering a question about XYZ, that you're peppering in key points and talking points, just the little brief ones about what makes you the best candidate for the role. You need to help to set in the mind of the interviewer those talking points that you want them to remember. So come in with a prepared set of reasons why you're the right person for the job. And then power tip number 3 is make sure that you are interviewing back. An interview is a 2-way conversation. Sure, the hiring manager needs to know that you're the right person for the role, but you need to know that the company is the right company for you to join. Now, I get it. You may just need a job or any job, but make sure that you're not coming into that interview with that attitude, because as a hiring manager, it's very easy for me to tell if you want a job or my job. And I want to hire somebody who wants my job, not just any job. And you can show the person that you're interested by having good, crisp, clean, important, thoughtful questions prepared so that you can ask questions back of the HR screener, of the hiring manager, and anyone else that you're going to be interviewing with that day. So there's 3 power tips for preparing for not just the HR screen, but all of the interviews that you're likely to have as part of this cycle. So we've established that the goal of this interview is to get to the next interview. It's not to win the job. That comes later. So in order to get to the next interview, you have to meet a certain set of minimum requirements that the HR recruiter has in their mind. And to understand what those requirements are, we need to think about the motivation of this HR recruiter. Number 1 motivation is they want to find high quality candidates. That goes without saying, that's what the job is. But the number 2 motivation is they want to do it really quickly. Recruiters are often super busy people. They will have to go through hundreds of resumes and talk to dozens of people in a week, sometimes even in a day, to help find the right candidate for the job. And so they don't have a lot of time. They're going to be direct. They're going to be to the point. They're people. They tend to be people, which is nice. It's sometimes easier to establish a quick rapport with an HR recruiter than even with the hiring manager. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to be on point and looking for very specific things. And they're going to take all of that 30-minute or so interview that they've had with you, and they're going to boil it down to probably 2 or 3 sentences that they're going to send off to the hiring manager as just a little bit of a, hey, you're going to want to check out this person. Here are the basics. And they send just the briefest amount of information. And so it's getting to those key talking points and having that HR recruiter kind of repeat and parrot those talking points that you want move forward. That's the trick in all of this. So what are they going to ask you about? They're going to ask you for salary information. They may not ask you directly about what your salary is. A lot of states are not allowing that now, but they're going to want to find out what range you're looking for. Because if that's not a fit, there's no point in moving forward. This is a phone screen. They're going to be kind of big things that they're looking for. So salary, level of seniority. Are you senior enough for the role that you're looking to be hired into? Your resume is going to tell them some of it, but they're likely going to probe a little bit more to say, well, how many years did you do this? How many years of actual project management experience have you had? They may ask you questions around size of projects that you've been on, both in terms of budget and on number of people that were on the project. They might ask you about some basic skills. But remember, HR recruiters, they're all about, their profession is HR. They're about recruiting. They're not necessarily going to understand Agile and PMI and all of those types of things. So I wouldn't try to dazzle them with your project management depth unless they ask you a question that opens the door for that. They're going to be looking for a little bit bigger, more basic information, like how many years of actual real project management experience do you have? And then they're going to be looking for fit with the company. And what fit means is some company cultures are very aggressive, some are more collaborative, some are more staid like banks and they move a little bit slower, some move really fast. They're going to look for experience in your past that shows them that you would be a good fit for it. For example, if you've been with the same company for 10 years and it's a large multinational kind of slow moving company and you're applying for a job at a high-tech startup, they're going to probe that. They're going to want to see if you can actually make that turn. So you're going to want to think about what your responses are going to be for questions like those. And then their final motivation is they need to keep their pipeline of candidates full. So sometimes they they cast a really broad net, meaning they might be interviewing you because one small part of your resume fits what they're looking for. I've had interviews with phone recruiters where I know myself I'm not a very good candidate for it, but they just have to ask a few questions before they figure that out. And I usually actually give that courtesy interview, even if I am pretty certain that it's not going to be a fit, because it's good to build up contacts. It's also good to keep your interview skills fresh and alive. So those are the motivations of the HR screener. They want to move quickly. They want to find the right candidate. And they're going to take everything. They're going to have to figure out how to boil it down to a really brief couple of sentences for the hiring manager. And they're going to cover the big rocks, the big screening items around salary, seniority, and things like that. So now that we understand what they're going to be looking for, let's talk about some of the questions that they're likely to ask you. Okay, so let's talk about the types of questions you're likely to get as a part of an HR recruiting interview. So there are going to be some questions that they're going to ask that are going to be unique to that circumstance. You can't prepare for everything. You're going to have to rely on your communication ability as well as your experience to get through those. But there are 4 or 5 that I want to talk with you about and have you be prepared for because they come up quite frequently. The first one that I want you to be prepared for is a very broad question. Tell me about yourself. So this one sounds like it's simple because after all, you are the world's foremost authority on yourself. However, I cannot tell you how many times I have heard people just ramble on when given that kind of unstructured question. So you're not going to do that. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to prepare for that question. You're going to give yourself somewhere between 30 and 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes on the outside to answer that question. And you're going to cover 3 main areas. The first thing that you're going to cover is your experience. You're going to summarize that experience in 2 sentences or less. So you're going to say something like, I've been doing project management for X number of years. I've worked at companies like XYZ. They're this size. Whatever it is you need to do to explain and help the recruiter to understand what your experience is, that's what you're going to talk about. So once you have a couple of really nice tight sentences worked out, explaining in a broad way your experience, you're going to turn the tables and you're going to talk about why you see this role as an opportunity. You're going to take it straight to them about why you like the role and why you like the company. Again, just a couple of sentences, but show your passion for the role, and that will set you up for the third category you're going to cover in this brief introduction, and that is why you are uniquely suited for this role. You're going to build from here's my broad experience, here's why I like the role, and then the big finish is, and this is why I'm perfectly suited for it. Maybe it's you have experience that directly applies. Maybe it's that you've got a set of experiences in the periphery of it that you can all bring to bear on it. Whatever it is, whatever makes you feel like makes you uniquely qualified for it, that's where you give the pitch, and then you stop. Keep yourself time-bound. Even if the person isn't jumping in to cut you off, go ahead and show that you've got that control and that you've got that kind of mastery over what it is you do and why you want the role. Another question you're likely to get asked is, why are you looking? What the recruiter's trying to get down to is, what is the motivation for you to take a job that you currently have and leave it to come work somewhere else? People don't like change, so something has to be motivating you to look for other roles. Now, it could be that you're not employed, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to tell the recruiter. And I believe you should always be absolutely honest and use integrity when you're in interviews. But let's talk about how you should respond if you have a current job and then if you don't have a job. So if you have a job right now and you're looking, it probably means that you're not very happy where you are. It could be that you don't like the manager. It could be that the company's not doing well. Maybe you don't like the industry. Some of those recruiter's going to understand and you'll be able to just move on, no red flags. Others of those are going to red flag. So if you don't like your manager That's okay. That's a legitimate reason, but be careful how you phrase it, because no one wants to hire somebody who is difficult, who could be trouble down the road if they're really fussy about things. So it's okay to say, had some challenges with management, looking for opportunity in this company because. Don't dwell on the negative. Don't go into long stories about why you want to leave the company you're with. That's not going to resonate well. It's going to sound like sour grapes. Now, if you are looking because this is a legitimate opportunity where there's some career growth or title improvement as a result of it, talk about that. Talk about, well, I like where I am, but this I see as an opportunity because, and then build on the positive side of things. Now, if you don't have a job currently, that's perfectly okay. Explain why you don't. Maybe you're coming back after a long leave. Why is that? If you were laid off, talk about the circumstances of the layoff and move on. Now, if you quit or if you were fired, those can be a little bit more tricky because people who quit, usually there's some kind of a story there. And the recruiter's going to want to know a little bit about it. And you're going to have to share some details. But be careful not to go in too far on the negative side. It could make you look like a negative person or that you're hot-headed. And you don't want either of those kinds of perceptions. So keep it fact-based, keep it matter-of-fact, and try to get the conversation moved on to the next question as quickly as possible. The next type of question that you're likely to get will be directly about your project management experience. The recruiter is going to be looking for a few things, probably fed to them by the hiring manager about the types of candidates that the hiring manager is looking for. So there could be questions around the total number of projects that you've managed, the length of time that you've been a project manager, the size of projects in terms of numbers, in terms of budget, or in terms of number of employees that you've had under your control as a project manager. There could be domain questions in there. Do you have experience in managing projects in security, in marketing, in whatever it might be? The way to prepare for this is to look very carefully at that job description. Think about what the company does. Think about what department that role is in. And you're going to be able to pull out some of the key things from that job description that you're likely to be asked. So you're going to have to do some homework. You're going to have to study that job description as it was published and put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes or in the recruiting manager's shoes and think about those types of questions about what experience this company is really looking for and be prepared with those answers. Again, it's always best to have good, sharp, crisp, concise answers to any questions that you're asked. But think about the role and how you fit in it. Another question that you're very likely to be asked by a recruiter has to do with salary. And depending on the state that you're in, the question might be, what is your current salary? Or if you're in a state like mine where you're not allowed to ask that question, they're going to ask, what are your salary expectations? Either way, you need to be prepared for this question. And this is a question that a lot of people shy away from. They fear it. There's no reason to fear it. Take it head on. It's one of the most important things about a job. I like to believe that most employers are not out there to try to get employees at the very lowest cost possible. My philosophy is that I'm hiring somebody who I want to have a long-term relationship with, and the financial compensation is an important part to that person's happiness. So I think there are a lot of hiring managers out there that have a similar philosophy. And so you want to find companies where that is going to be more the norm than just trying to push you down the salary ladder as far as they'll let you. How do you prepare for these types of questions? The first thing you need to do is you need to set the proper expectations for yourself. You need to get things right in your own mind about what the salary level should be. It may not be that this job or this move is going to be a huge salary boost to you. So you need to come to terms with that. But here's what the things that you need to think about. First, what is the type of company that you're interviewing for? If they're in an industry that is doing really well and is hot right now, then you might be able to negotiate a little bit more. And so therefore your expectations can be a little bit higher there. What is the type of job? Is there a better title with this job? Are you taking on a really important project for the company? If the answer is yes to any of those things, then your expectations should be a little bit higher than where they are right now. And then on some occasions, not very often, you might have a skill match that is difficult for employers to find. If you have a skill set that is in high demand, then you should set your expectations a little bit higher. But if none of those things exist, and this is just kind of a job change to a different company in a similar role, I would not expect a big payday out of this type of a job switch. There could be some, but don't set your expectations too high. So once you've kind of got it right in your head about what you should expect, the thing to do next is to actually develop a number. So the number that you're going to start with, of course, is your salary. Now, I actually like to think in terms of total compensation. Not all companies have kind of a total compensation package, so this may not be relevant to you. But if it is, total compensation is a combination of base salary, bonus, and some kind of stock compensation, usually in the form of restricted stock units. And so as long as the role that I am looking to move into has a better total compensation potential, that might be enough for me rather than just having that base salary climb up and up. And so personally, I'm flexible. As long as the total goes up, I'm okay with the form that it takes. So I like to talk in terms of total compensation. However, if you're not in an industry that talks that way, or those are not options, then you might just be negotiating on straight up on the base salary, and that's okay too. But to start your number that you're going to give them, start with what your base salary is. Now, if they've asked you what the base salary is and you're in that state, I think honesty and integrity is always the best policy. I would just tell them what it is. However, I would follow it up with expectations as to why you think that this job should be leveled a little differently. If they asked you what the expectation is, I would think in terms of, well, this job is a better title. It's farther away, so my commute's going to be a little bit more. I have an in-demand skill set, therefore I think I should have a little bit more, and start putting some numbers to that expectation. And, think in terms of 5%, 10%. These are not going to be big jumps. I've honestly never seen somebody who goes into a new job and is suddenly making 50% more than they made before. So when you're developing your number, think about all those things that are changing for you and add to that what that expectation is, or take away. If you're getting a job that is literally down the street from you where you had been commuting for an hour, that might be worth something to you to take a little bit less in terms of salary because that commute has gotten that much better for you. So once you develop whatever that total number is, after you've taken into account all of those differences, you're ready to have that negotiation. When you're at the point that the recruiter asks you what your salary is or your salary expectations are, you have a few options. The first option is to turn that question around on the recruiter and say, well, what is your salary range for this job? And that might seem like a legitimate question, but I actually think that there's some risk in doing that. Recruiters know that people don't like to answer the salary question, that it's difficult for them. And so as soon as you dodge it, you're going to be seen as just there's a little whiff of weakness to that. And they might just turn it right back around on you and say, no, I'd like to hear your expectations. And then you're faced with that question anyway. You just now look a little bit weaker. They also may not give you kind of the full range for what the role might be. It's part of their future negotiating tactics. And if they give you a range that's lower than where you want to be, you're kind of stuck now. And that's unfortunate. So there's another option. You can go ahead and give a range. So whatever number you've come up with after taking into account all the differences, let's say that number is 120,000, you might be tempted to say, well, my range is 115 to 125,000. Problem with that is that the number that they're going to hear is 115. They're not going to hear the 125. So I am not a big fan of giving a range on a person's salary. I know as a hiring manager, I think of only that first number, the lowest that they're willing to go. To me, the best option is always to be very upfront about the number that you're expecting. So if the number that you came up with was, let's say, $120,000, it's okay to say, well, my expectation is, and make it maybe 10% more. So that'd be 130,000 or 132,000 for this role. That's okay because you're actually just doing the negotiation game. They'll probably come back with something a little bit less. But don't go 150,000. Don't go something much bigger than where you think that number should be. Then you're just kind of playing a game, and that's seen through pretty quickly by the recruiters. Another question that you're very likely to be asked is, when can you start? Now, this probably isn't a very stressful question, but there are a few things that you should absolutely consider. First is, you should always give your current employer at least 2 weeks notice. Even if you don't like them, even if you've had problems there, the only way to act ethically is to give that employer enough notice so that they can start the process to bring in your replacement. So 2 weeks is the absolute minimum. If somebody said I could start today and they had a job, I would be very concerned and would question whether I would want to hire that person anyway. Now, if you're not working at the moment, then as soon as possible is absolutely an option. There's no problems with that. I also believe that you should show your integrity with your current employer by trying to tie off any loose ends that you have, any projects that you're trying to finish up. So if the company really wants you right away, your new company, or you think that they do, it's an urgent hire for the company, I think it's okay to go ahead and let that company know, well, I've got some projects that I committed to doing. I'd really like to see them finished. And I think that's the fair thing to do. If you can't do that, that is okay. Again, you've got that 2 weeks minimum that you should always hold to. And then the last question you need to think about is, do you want to build in any time off between when you leave that job and when you start? A lot of people like to do this. I think it's a good idea if you can. I've rarely taken advantage of it in my career. In fact, a couple of jobs ago, I actually quit my job set my last day to be a Thursday because that company really wanted me in an important client meeting on that Friday. So I actually started my new job on a Friday, which is pretty unusual. Just know that you're going to want to think about those things ahead of time so that you're not caught in a surprised way when the question is asked. And then the last question that you're likely to get asked about will be around education or certification. Some jobs have a minimum education requirement. Best policy there, just be totally upfront. Hopefully you have that educational requirement, but it's not something that you can or should fake. As far as certifications go, hopefully you have the right certifications for the job as well. But if you don't, there are a couple of strategies that you can employ. If you are close to getting a certification that is a requirement for this particular role, it's okay to say, I plan to have this certification by XYZ date. And then make sure you're working hard in the background to get the certification by then. You can also say, I don't have that certification, but I'm a member of this society, whether it's Agile or PMI, whatever it is, and talk about how you might be active in there and that certifications are on your roadmap to get to. May not be fully satisfactory, but at least you're not caught just saying, no, I don't have that, sorry. That's a pretty weak answer. So those are the questions that you should be prepared to answer as a part of your phone screen with your recruiter. You may get other questions as well, but I would hope now that you've seen this, that you will not be caught by surprise by any of these questions and that you can go into that interview with more confidence. Remember that the goal of the interview is not to get the job, it's to get to the next interview. So hopefully that's a little less stressful to you. So as you go into this, just think about, what are the minimum things that I have to be able to say or do? What are those hurdles that I have to jump to get into that next round of interview? I hope that this information has been useful. Look for the next episode in the next week or two to come out, where we're going to talk about the initial conversation with the hiring manager. And in my world, it's typically a phone call with the hiring manager. So I'm going to give you some insights and tips into the questions that I ask as a way to screen out and screen in candidates for my jobs. And then after that, we'll talk about doing on-site interviews. If you found any of this useful, please like the video, subscribe, put comments in the comments for things that you would like to see. I would love to hear from you. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining the Project Management Nation.